Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP met his future wife at a movie theater, leading to a spontaneous relationship and marriage. When a new job required frequent travel, his wife became distant and began cheating. Discovering her infidelity through apps, messages, and photos, he quietly planned his exit, divorced her, and exposed her actions. Now, he's rebuilding his life. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I had been together for about 3 years. We met at a movie theater where we both had matinee tickets to see a film. We were the only ones in the entire audience. Before it started, I saw her and thought she was cute. I moved over and sat down next to her, and we struck up a conversation before the movie started. When the film ended, I asked her to grab coffee with me so we could discuss the movie together. We exchanged numbers later that day, and we started dating. We both lived in the city in small studio apartments that we hated. We moved in together about 8 months into dating because we felt very strongly about each other. Plus, with our shared income, we could afford a one-bedroom apartment that was much bigger. We were able to buy furniture for the first time since living in the city, and we're very excited about that. Neither of us had the best jobs in the world. We loved each other, and we thought that was really what mattered. The little extra money that we had we would use for experiences that we could do together like concerts, movies, festivals, you name it. We didn't have a lot of money in savings at that point. A few months into living together, I said we should just get married. She went with it, and a few days later we were signing papers to the courthouse. It didn't make much of a difference in our relationship, but just knowing we were married was nice. I got offered a job that paid a good deal more than what I was making in the city. We didn't want to move away because we loved the city life, but I couldn't turn down the job. One of the best things about the job was that I would work for 2 weeks straight, 10 hours a day every day, then I would have 3 weeks off. It paid well, but it only paid once a month. We figured out a way for me to take this job and not have to leave the city. Essentially, I was booking a 2-week stay at a hotel and working, then coming back home for the 3 weeks that I was off. We knew that it was going to be a challenge for the first few months because of the extra money we'd be spending on hotels. We figured we could cut back on some things to make that work. Then when we caught up and good money was coming in, we could start splurging again. My wife wasn't crazy about it. I wasn't giving her luxury bags or meals at 3-star restaurants, but we had the money to go out when we wanted to. During my first stint on the job, my wife kept complaining to me about how bored she was all the time and how she wished I hadn't taken the job. I was frustrated that she couldn't just suck it up for a few months while I did something that would change her life with how much extra money we would have. About a week into my first work trip, I got a weird message from a friend. We were pretty close, but in recent months drifted away from each other. They messaged me and asked if anything had happened between my wife and me. I was confused and I told them that everything was fine. I was just away working on the new job. I asked about why they thought something was off, and they told me they were at a restaurant and positive they saw my wife with another man on a date. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them that they must have been wrong, but they told me they took a picture just to be sure. They sent it to me and it was my wife. I called my wife right away and asked her about it. She told me that it was a work meeting she was at and that I was overthinking it. I was suspicious, but she had never given me a reason to doubt her in the past, so I was more apt to take her word for it over the friend. I texted the friend and explained everything, that they apologized for overstepping their bounds. I returned home for my 3-week stay there, and everything seemed normal with my wife for the first week. During the other 2 weeks, I noticed that she was on her phone a lot more than usual. She was also taking a lot of selfies, which was strange for her. I was curious about who she was sending these pictures to if it wasn't me. I took a mental note of her Snapchat score one day, and I checked it about a week later, and it had increased by over 100. I kept an eye on it while I was away for my next 2 weeks stint at work, and it was steadily increasing, more than it was when I checked it while I was home, and she wasn't sending me anything on Snapchat at all. I was in my head about why the score was changing so much, so I did a quick Google search to see if there were some obvious reasons. Almost everything I found confirmed that she was sending and receiving messages. From everything I gathered with other people asking these questions, they were concerned that their partners were cheating. When I got home after work, I kept that thought in the back of my head, but I didn't say anything. I didn't have any proof, and telling her that I noticed her Snapchat score increasing was going to make me look crazy and jealous. The first opportunity one had to take a look at her phone, I jumped at it. She was in the shower, and she left it sitting on the bed. When I looked through it, I found three major things. The first was that she had an app downloaded to help sugar daddies find people to date. Her profile showed her in skimpy dresses and lingerie showing off her body. Dozens of men were messaging her. Some even sent her money on Venmo to prove they were the real deal. The second thing I noticed was dozens of Snapchat messages from men with nicknames like Ben Defense Attorney Tesla and others like that. She was exchanging nudes with the men on Snapchat. The third thing was her text message exchanges with some of the men. She had clearly met up with at least three of them. They had taken her to fancy restaurants and bought her new clothes and things for the house. I hadn't noticed the things before, but when I looked around I saw them. Through the messages, I figured out she brought one guy back to our apartment and had intimate with him in our bed. I was furious with what I saw. It was obvious it was some kind of retaliation against the spending cuts we were doing while my job was new. She wanted fancy dinners and expensive wine, so she lied and stabbed me in the back. I sent myself a bunch of screenshots and videos of the things that I'd seen, so I could have them for our impending divorce. There was no way I was going to be staying with her and sending all of the money that I was earning at my new job to her when she was doing that. I spent the rest of my time at home secretly looking for another apartment closer to my job. I didn't want anything to do with her, and I didn't even want to be in the city because it reminded me of her so much. When the time came for me to go back to work, my wife really had no idea I was leaving for good. I took a lot of things out while she was at work, so she wouldn't notice me taking everything out of the apartment. When I got there, I moved into a new apartment and took my wife's name off of my bank account. I have been looking for a divorce attorney while I was still in the city. I had papers and I was sending them to her in the mail. I got off work one night and looked at my phone to see I had dozens of missed calls and text messages from her. She had received the petition for divorce in the mail, and that explained everything about why I wanted a divorce. She didn't know why I was accusing her of cheating. I sent her a text message telling her everything I knew and a couple of screenshots I had taken. Apparently, she was going to sue me for going through her private property. I didn't know how well that would hold up in court. We ended up going through with the divorce, and I was able to get my name off of the lease in the city, so she was solely responsible for it. I posted about the divorce on her social media before she commented on anything, so I could have the narrative in my own hands. I had a gut feeling she was going to try and blame the separation on me, so I wanted to get ahead of it. We were divorced and I didn't owe her anything in spousal support, but I figured she was still getting a lot of her money from the men she was seeing. I had a few of their phone numbers from the screenshots that I had gathered. I threw all of them into a group chat and I sent a message telling them that my ex-wife was married to me when she was with them and that she was talking to countless men and taking their money. Some of them didn't care about it. They probably assumed that was what was happening anyway. But it seemed like a couple of them thought that they were in something serious with her. I hoped they would cut things off with her. That would be ideal so she would not have any of these men paying for her things anymore. She called me a few days after that and cursed me out over the phone for ruining her relationships. She probably lost out on a nice sum of money from the men she was straining along. I felt bad for them in some ways, but at the same time, they were on a sugar daddy dating website, so they had to know what they were getting into. I live closer to my job, so I'm not having to commute back and forth, which is great. I have a nice apartment, and I'm making a decent living. It's been about a year since all this happened, so I'm getting back out into dating and hoping for the best. Today's second story. In this story, Opie discovered that his wife Susan had been engaging in an incestuous relationship with her brother Kane. After finding explicit messages and photos, He hired a private investigator and gathered evidence. He then exposed the affair to their families, leading to a public confrontation. Now awaiting divorce, he feels emotionally drained but relieved to escape the situation. Now let's get into the story. I'm Mel, 37, have been married to Susan, 32, for 2 years now. So 5 weeks ago, I was supposed to take a short business trip that would last a day, and I'd be back home the next evening. I set out very early in the morning, but for some reason, the trip was canceled midday, and I decided to go home, rather unexpectedly. It was a rainy day, and driving into the garage, I was surprised to see her younger brother, Kane's car parked next to my wife's. Kane was 2 years younger than Susan and had a heavier masculine build. Kane was married and had a 7-month-old baby, whom Susan frequently babysat on Friday nights so that her sister-in-law could go out. That left her to have some quality time with her brother and the baby. It worked fine for me because I knew how close the two siblings were, and just found a way to let them connect in their space. I had always known them to be each other's best friends, but my distaste for him grew following a weird stunt he pulled at my wedding reception. On that evening, in his emotional state, he walked up to Susan and, in the full glare of our wedding guests, planted a deep kiss in her mouth with a bear hug. Of course, needless to say, I was shell-shocked by that, but there was nothing I could do. I just brushed it off as the kid being touched by his sister being married off. I was asked to forgive his overreaching act, and I did, but I grew weary of him. As I stood in the garage, I heard the sound of soft music coming from the sitting room. That's where our sound system was. I got really uncomfortable and slowly walked in. The music was loud, and they didn't hear me approaching. I didn't know what to make of the sight that met my eyes. Susan and Kane stood at the center of the sitting room, locked in an embrace. They jumped apart when they saw me, and the look on their faces said it all. I knew at that moment that my marriage was in trouble. I was extremely upset, but I didn't let it show. She said something along the lines of his marriage being in trouble, so he was looking for emotional support. As if that would explain why he was intimately embracing his sister and slow dancing to romantic music in my living room. Soon after the incident, one day she went out to babysit his baby and forgot her phone at home. That was my moment of discovery. I went through her WhatsApp messages and found that she was indeed sexting her own brother, and they were exchanging nudes. I love you and all the shebang. It was the most disgusting, vile, unbelievably nods and inducing thing I've ever witnessed. I threw the phone away, rushed to the bathroom, and threw up. After that, I sat for hours in a state of stupor. Their closeness has always raised everyone's eyes, but everybody dismissed it as being two extremely close siblings, including her parents, who dismissed their extreme bonding as being due to their growing up in a neighborhood with no kids. They became their only friends and grew up like that, their older sister being far away at school. I wasn't comfortable with what was going on, but I wasn't going to confront her about it. This definitely dated way back, and it wouldn't stop now. For the first time, I thought of Susan differently. I could see what I was to her, a husband who was there just so that she could claim to be married while continuing to screw her brother. As I sat burning with fury, I grabbed her phone once more, took a screenshot of the messages, everything, and sent them to my phone before deleting it from hers. Reading through, I understood that the babysitting was a sham, and that was their cook-up nights. I was in pain. Susan came back that night and behaved totally fine, as if she hadn't just come back from screwing her brother. My skin was crawling at the mere thought of sharing a bed with her, but I did anyway. I was so done with the bish. I decided to hire a private investigator. His job was simple: track her movements and get me their photos. She was going down, and I was going to make sure she had to live the rest of her life as a recluse. A few days later, Susan told me she was going on a business trip. She'd be out of town for a few days. Her business was mainly online, and there were only a few occasions when she needed to make a business trip, so I knew something was up. Nevertheless, I played along. Not wanting to make it look as if I suspected anything, I refrained from asking her too many questions and wished her good luck as she supposedly traveled. I alerted my PI, and he and I both knew this was the moment. A few hours after she left on her business trip, I was at my office when my PI called to let me know she and her brother had met up somewhere out of town and driven down to a beach hotel some hours away. I started to think that I was going to be a good person. Started packing my stuff. It'd be a matter of hours before I would get the pictures. The next evening, my PI mailed me dozens of pictures of them doing extreme PDA on the beach, walking around the city, hanging around in shopping malls, etc., and looking like newlyweds. I was appalled and hurried up the packing process. I just wanted to be gone so fast. But before that, I invited her parents, Sister B.L., incestuous brother's wife and baby, and some other close family and friends in the area to hang out that evening and watch some games. I made large copies of the photographs and hung them around the house, starting from the living room. Then I took my luggage and had a friend drive me away to his place. Once evening came, I got a call from his parents asking where I was, so I told them I had gotten a last-minute errand and to let themselves in as they knew the passcode. A minute later, my wife's sister called frantically and asked what the frick all these pictures were. I explained everything while she put me on speakerphone. I explained to them that their siblings were incestuous freaks and have been screwing each other probably since they were still living with their parents. Then I told them their current location and told them to go find them there if they didn't believe me. I also let them know that the divorce papers were on the dining table. Hours later, Susan called me screaming. I could hear a commotion in the background. Apparently, her whole family had appeared at her hotel, and her BIL and male cousins had begun beating up her brother. The hotel had called the police. I could hear her parents and sister and her brother's wife probably screaming murder in the background. She was sobbing and asked why I would do that to her, to which I simply replied that she deserved it. She started wailing at that, so I hung up. I was broken enough as it was. I had no intention to dwell on how her life turned out. Her sister called me and let me know what happened a few days later. Apparently, police never showed up, and the hotel staff broke the fight apart. The word of the wife and brother's affair had gotten around, and now they have disappeared off to somewhere to escape the scrutiny. The revelation was so shocking that her dad got very sick afterward, but he's all right now. Sadly, it turned out she didn't sign the divorce papers before she vanished off the face of the earth, so it's a waiting game on that front. But it seems like she's not the only one in the family getting served. Kane's wife is also divorcing him. I just feel so emotionally and physically drained, but I also feel a huge relief that this came out the time it did. We were planning on starting a family, and imagine if she had actually gotten pregnant by her brother and had a child that would very likely be born with a lot of complications and disabilities due to being inbred. I'd have been strapped to raising it. It sends shivers down my spine how close I came to that. So yeah, I'm drained as fuck, but I'm relieved. I just want to put it out there. Put this whole thing past me and move on.